This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer?
Experts in the Wire, episode 121. Becky, Westmoreland. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 121 of Experts on the Wire. My guest today is Becky Westmoreland, and she is currently SEO director at Fandom, where she has successfully led a project of migrating 250,000 plus websites. Yes, that is websites with millions of URLs, including many other things she's done over that Fandom. Prior to that, she was formerly SEO manager at eOnline, as well as SEO manager at dictionary.com. And today we're going to chat about a lot of cool things, including how did Fandom pull off successfully migrating those millions of URLs? What migrations and content cleanup has to do with core updates? I think you'll find this stuff pretty interesting. Also, we'll get Becky's take on some things having to do with core web vitals, some challenges they're facing there, as well as Becky maybe trying to convince me to get into gaming. We'll see what happens. And I'm going to try to sneak in a few other questions around SEO in general as well when working on such a large site like Fandom. But let's jump in. Becky, how are you?
Doing all right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on Experts on the Wire. Just real quick, before we jump into the Fandom stuff, for context, about when did you start getting into and doing SEO?
So I started in SEO a long time ago. I was probably, I actually started in SEM first. I worked at a small company called newcars.com that was purchased by cars.com doing paid media. And I started going to conferences like SES. And when I would go to conferences, I tried to split my time because I was very interested in organic as well as going to the paid media experts because I wanted to get as much information as possible. And I also do see the relationship between the two. So that was way long time. That was 2005, I think. So yeah. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And then I officially started working. I started volunteering to help websites. One was a German Shepherd rescue. Just doing SEO there to kind of get your feet wet and help a good cause. And then I got my first official full-time position with SEO specifically in 2007 at a startup called SodaHead.
Very cool. And we're going to be talking a lot about Fandom today. So can you just explain for anybody not familiar with what Fandom is? What exactly is Fandom?
So Fandom's vision is to be the entertainment and gaming fans' first choice for community and experience. And so essentially what we're looking for is if you're trying to enjoy your world in whatever your fandom might be, whether it's video games, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's a book series, like it could be Lord of the Rings, not the movies. It could be comic books like Marvel that are not the movies. But it's about finding a place where you feel like you belong and you can enjoy your fandom with other folks who also share that.
I like that. And concretely speaking, Fandom is made up of like articles and wikis, right? And there's lots of subdomains. Are there any other very common types of content that you have, just so the listeners have context?
Yep. There's discussion areas, there's polls, there's, every site is run by dedicated fans. So you'll find different experiences depending on the fandom. So for example, something like Harry Potter will be led by different people than Star Wars. The Star Wars Wikipedians have been around for a very long time, whereas newer franchises like maybe Attack on Titan, a more anime feature, might be newer and have just a different kind of audience. So it could be anything from discussions to information, facts, trivia, everything you would want to know to dive into that what we consider your imagined world that is real.
Very
so we
cool.
Look at it that way.
So I want to chat to you about this migration. So I believe this happened a few years ago, but can you set up and explain this project? Like what exactly was migrating and what were some of the challenges that you were facing?
Yeah, so I was brought into the company after the rebrand. The company was going from wikia.com to fandom.com. And so in that move, we also were going to SSL sites from non-SSL, which is also an undertaking, as well as because of SSL being more expensive to maintain. And with over 250,000, 300,000 websites, you wanted to collapse all the languages under the same umbrella. In the past, they had been subdomains. I don't know if that's the official word for it, but that's what I call it.
That's what I call it too.
I know there's an official word, but so, it used to be something like es.starwars.wikia.com, and we were moving that to starwars.com/es as an example.
Yeah.
So with all of that, we're moving parts. And so they were looking for someone who had done a major migration before, and I had worked with dictionary.com, moving it from the reference domain to its home domain of www.dictionary.com. And so undertaking it was very massive. They had already been planning it through the tech teams for at least a year, if not longer. It was, thinking about how this process, and that was not from a brand perspective for the record, that was later decided. It was more just the SSL move, which is huge anyway. So this was just something being tacked on with the moving the subfoldered international sites, as well as the branding change, which was, they just decided to do it once.
So I'm curious.
And so that's a challenge, and it's scary.
Right. I'm curious about starting with the planning process from an SEO standpoint, right? So when I think about that, I'm thinking, okay, you probably need a way to crawl and keep track of all these URLs, right? Probably. What tools or what processes, or how are you sort of managing the scale of this? Using a tool, or what was your process there for preparing?
We did partner at the time with Searchmetrics. That was we had a consultant that was helping, and a couple of consultants from their team that were helping, because there's so much that you want to double check and crawl. We also tracked several thousand keywords, but we couldn't afford. You can't really afford to. No tool can really track our scale in effect. Like other companies can. So it was a lot of sampled, like from our top communities where we care, top 50 or 100 keywords that we care about. And then we use Stats raw data pool at the time they had. I don't know if they currently have that product with the Moz buyout, but we used their tool to pull raw data in and then build our own reports in our BI tool to watch what would happen with each community. And very interesting. We started with a test set in October 2018. So we only migrated about 2,900 or so websites to see how is Google going to behave, what can we look forward to, and then help forecast a little better what might happen the next time, which we all know is not definite, but at least it gives you some guidance of what to expect.
Yeah.
And it went pretty seamless, and it was pretty fast. It was within a couple months that we were back to the inverse spell. But the one thing we did notice is there are sites that lost. So they might have been ranking better before migration than after. And then there were sites also that got rewarded and were doing much better than they had prior. And so the interesting thing is that it's almost as if Google is doing a regrade of your sites when you migrate. And so that's where it kind of comes into the way I migrate. And with all these changes where there was not a one-to-one exact match.
Yeah.
However, doing the cleanup and hygiene that sites need is also good, I think, to do before this, because then when Google sees the news site, you have a better opportunity of reestablishing what is your baseline. And then if you look at the evidence and visibility in our ranking, over time, we've been insulated from many of the core algorithm updates, because I feel like that point, we reestablish what our base is. So when the core comes in, it most of the time is not hitting us. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get hit, et cetera. This is a UG site, but there is this value that if you can do a lot of cleanup and then give Google like, hey, here's my new stuff, they'll be able to regrade it appropriately. And then you're protected from what could be like surprises later.
Yeah, I want to dig into, that was one of the most fascinating things I think we're going to talk about, was this cleanup first and then preventing of the core updates later. So before you move stuff, what exactly are you cleaning up on those sites? Is it deleting stuff?
So you're looking at thin content. Yep. Let's start with that one.
Yep.
A lot of sites that we moved a lot of sites out of the fandom core, which are not entertainment. So we had things like history, which is more factual, like more like a Wikipedia feel, but it is for a fan. And we moved all those into the wikia.org domain. So things like that aren't specifically an entertainment fandom or a hobby fandom were moved out. So we're distinguishing who fandom really is. And I think that's huge.
That's like a topical, being clear about the topic boundaries. I've seen that a lot, like where there's a site that goes way all over the place, topically speaking. Those tend to suffer unless you're like New York Times or something. Is that the kind of the idea there, is making a very clear line in the sand what the topic boundaries were?
Yeah. And then as a product, when you go all over the place, it's really hard to ensure quality across the board. And for example, we had an autism Wikia org right now, and autism obviously is not something you're a fan of. So that doesn't fit in that domain anyways. That would be offensive, and that's not where it belongs.
Yeah.
At the same time, that kind of information isn't something that is entertainment. So from Google's perspective, when they're looking at your site, and even if you're a network as we are, it's not going to evaluate it the same way if has a lot of different topics. And I know people, it doesn't mean you can't rank other stuff. It doesn't mean you can't do well in other things. It's just something to be cognizant as you're doing your strategy, that you want to be very specific about what is your goal, what are you trying to solve, and how are you going to establish authority and expertise, which is what they're looking for with the EAT concept. How are you going to be trusted if you're all across the board? Are you literally being, vetted by doctors? Well, we can't say we are, so that wouldn't make sense. But
right. And how are you managing this at scale, right? Because even one site, as you call it, is probably thousands and thousands of pages. So are you getting real granular and manual? Is it being automatic in some way? How are you managing all that?
It's a balance of both, and also using a lot of your experience in the past and, looking for trends. And so you can't look at 200,000 plus websites. It's impossible.
You can't.
You're looking at your big sites. You're understanding the competitors. So understanding the Star Wars competitors. You're understanding the Marvel competitors, which are news sites or IGN or IMDb, which have similar, concepts of authority and expertise. But you're essentially measuring yourself in that way, and then seeing how am I giving more value, or what value am I trying to get to the searcher. And then, so it's not manual so much, other than like, if you really understand the audience. And I think that's something, I really understand this audience because I am the audience. And so that's important.
And how are you deciding, just to get even digging a little bit more, like what to delete, for example, or how are you assessing the quality? Is it that something on a page is just not matching the search query very well, or there's duplicate items, or, what sort of criteria is going into that?
Those were some items. There was also a community that apparently decided to take everything Wikipedia deleted and to copy it into our site.
Oh my goodness.
On their own site. So they created like, I don't remember the name of the domain, but it could be something like deadwikipedia.wiki at the time.com.
Oh, wow.
And so I was looking at that site and going, okay, you guys, this is not good content. This isn't really our brand. And so can you please move, or we're going to be shutting this down in a couple of weeks. And we do allow people to take a database dump of the content they've contributed, and they can move elsewhere. In this case, we're going to retire that content because that's not what we want to be. So it's also, establishing who you are. It goes back to that. You want to establish who is your site? What are you?
And so basically you're testing it on some sites first. What metrics are you looking at to say, okay, this was a success, and in what time range, right? Because we all know there might be a slight dip or period of processing of things. So how exactly are you measuring to say, yes, that actually worked?
I have a rule of thumb of 6 weeks, because in my experience in past migrations is that it takes about that time for Google to really reprocess everything.
Yeah.
But that's personal experience. I can't say every SEO has encountered that, but that's been my experience, where every company I've worked at has migrated URLs, if not full domain, even at E when we had a whole new structure.
Yep.
So it usually takes about 6 weeks for them to really see these new impacts. And then a success, I look at the combination of the three things, and this is what I tell the internal stakeholders. It's not just about traffic, because traffic's certainly important, page views, but it's also visibility metrics, which we happen to be using search metrics, but we also look at the other, Systrix, there's another good one, or search or SEMrush, there's other tools. And it's looking for that trending of visibility. And then the other important component that people often forget is Google Trends. Because if your IP isn't hot right now, your page views might be down, but your ranking is probably fine. It's just not the interest isn't being driven there yet.
Yeah. And are you using Search Console at all, either the impressions or digging in deeper things like maybe the simple crawl stats or indexing numbers that they have in there as well?
In 2018, 2019, that had not happened because we didn't have the ability to look at the domain as a whole.
That's right.
And you
could
understand that you cannot register 2,000 websites. It's a very manual process.
Yeah.
And site after site after site, it's too complex. So that's some of the challenges we have with Google and Google Search Console. I mean, we leverage what we can out of it, like when we're looking at one use case. However, we are very challenged because of the scale. And so we are very thankful when the overall domain verification came about, because now we can get a sample of the whole network, getting trends of what's good, bad, what needs to be worked on, et cetera.
Yeah. And one thing I was curious too, so search metrics, it sounds like that's for visibility, right? And rankings. Are you using a particular tool for crawling and testing the redirects of all the URLs? Yeah.
So typically we're still migrating sites now. We're actually moving gamepedia.com into the fandom.com family. We have some tests going on right now. When we are using crawling, we use Deep Crawl as a general maintenance crawling tool because it's very helpful and it has a lot of good data. However, we do use Screaming Frog as well to do more, quick, just a double check, because Deep Crawl is deeper, frankly, and has that better breadth for our scale. Yeah. And Screaming Frog can't support the millions of URLs. It's just not because your computer's going to.
Right.
Even if you do a virtual computer, it could still get hairy.
Yeah. I've been using Deep Crawl a lot lately, and I'm a huge fan of it. And they've got a great team over there too. So absolute second that endorsement of Deep Crawl. Not a paid advertisement.
And I endorsed Deep Crawl in 2012, I want to say, like way back in the beginning, before I even had a company that was willing to pay for tools. Yeah. So for me, they are an awesome company, and if you can afford or not, their resources are always good to use. And when you can get budget, it's good to push for, because their tool is amazing.
Yeah. So
I'm not being paid to say that. It just literally is that good.
No, I agree. And so we talked about, so you did a bunch of test sites for the migration. And then at what point did you sort of say, okay, we've tested enough, now we can kind of move, quote unquote, everything? Or was there a point that you did actually then move like a lot of things all at once, or did you do it all in stages?
We still wanted to do stages. And also from a perspective, we tried to use the lowest point of page views in our general, you want to look at your company as a whole, and you want to take the loss and the less painful time than it would be. So we ended in October, the test went on. We were covered by December. We weren't going to roll out in Q4 because most websites, most companies in general, Q4 is not a good time. And then in Q1, we decided to start rolling out the bigger sites. And then it takes longer for the tail, but the vast majority of the traffic moved fairly quickly. Within, I'd say, a month or two, we were pretty much all rolled out, which was great.
And I think you may have mentioned
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. I think
the
you may have mentioned.
The team was amazing on this. So I was more of a coach and came in with a couple of they had really structured this move so well and organized. I was very impressed. This company was really ready for this. Yeah. And it was not coming in and having to convince people. It was amazing.
That brings up another question I had. I'm going to put a pin in. I wanted to ask about when you didn't have content matches, but you mentioned working with the tech team. And I did want to ask, how do you fit your workflow between the tech SEO department and then the tech team or product team or any other departments, especially post-COVID? Because when I used to consult in-house, going to visit clients in person, it was super easy. You set up a meeting, you gather in a conference room, and you're good to go. You kind of team up. But especially post-COVID, I found that to be trickier and trickier. So how does that workflow work, and how do you sort of encourage or manage that communication and collaboration between the other departments?
That's always challenging, as you know.
Yeah.
But I think essentially you have to be a networker. And so SEO, the bigger job, you can learn best practices. None of this is rocket science. It's a lot of logic. But most of your job is selling, if you will, to stakeholders. Yeah. In my case, it's stakeholders within the company, which is absolutely true. So getting in every meeting that you think is important, meeting with product leads, meeting with engineering leads, helping them get to know who you are as a person, And then, being very clear when you're requesting things. Also content folks, like I'm also working with some of our in-house content teams. It's also getting the PR person to know who you are so that you're making sure that links are being built appropriately when you're doing PR releases.
Yeah.
It's kind of this very networked approach, and it does help to have really good management that is promoting you and your goals, but that comes from the top, but it also is you working from the bottom up, and so that the entire company knows who you are, what you can help them with, and the goal is that they're coming to you and you're not chasing them. And so often that's challenging at first because there are many tech folks and product folks that aren't aware of where SEO belongs.
Yeah. And
that's in the beginning, as we know. Don't plan stuff already. Let's not bake half the cake and then go, oh, we needed SEO. Yeah. It's a little late. But it's important. It is a challenge. And I think as you start seeing success, when they do bake you in the beginning, you have that evidence to go, see, look at how awesome you guys did. And it's always a pushback on them because I'm more like a coach to me. It's not, the work is theirs. They're the ones that are owning the success. And I'm always like, thank you so much. Look how awesome you guys are. We're ranking for this keyword that we want to rank for.
Yeah.
We just launched the Tales of Zadia tabletop game. And when you can look up Dragon Prince TTRPG, that's what we want to rank for. We rank number 1. Yeah. That's what it's supposed to look like. And you're like, that's you guys. You did awesome.
That's amazing. How are you managing communication and getting in on meetings, especially now that we're all remote during COVID, right? Do you have particular tools, communication software? I'm always curious how people are doing that.
We're Zoom and Slack.
Yep.
And so we do both, and email. So a lot of it is just Slacking people, getting to know them, asking questions, what's going on, being a part of the roadmap process. And we've had our company's in a great growth period where we're starting to have where stakeholders and product are all meeting before when a roadmap's being built. We're putting together KPIs of success. So we're all working together as one team. So the team isn't engineering or product or marketing or community. We have a community team as well.
Yep.
It's everybody being a part of those meetings to establish what does success look. And it comes from a very strong, your C-level folks, executive teams building a vision that is measurable and achievable with some stretch in it, of course.
Right.
And so when you have that across the board, that is a good place to be. And I think Fandom is one of those companies that we're not perfect by any means, but we're definitely on the right track with those things. No company is perfect, but I think that's going to help enable the employees to do the best job they can. And sure, there's been things I've been left out of. And then I come in and I'm like, I have to become a little bit of the, oh no, but we work that in. And then we think about, okay, well, I wasn't in this project, but how can I help you in the future? And it's about retro and not taking it personally.
I think you may have mentioned some instances when you're migrating content that maybe you didn't move all the content or there wasn't a match. How did you handle that? Because I know my standard go-to recommendation is if the content doesn't match, you don't redirect it because that's what Google recommends. It can be a weird user experience. So I typically just recommend letting that 404 or 410 maybe, but were there nuances to that? How did you handle that?
We were fortunate that we didn't have that in the original migration. However, with Gamepedia moving to Fathom, there's a lot of different things that their media wiki instance was different than ours or the way we do URL. So that might come into more play in this migration that's going on now. And in that case, I do think that you shouldn't be soft 404ing because Google's going to tell you it's a soft 404. You're going to fill up your console. And I used to be the 301 to the homepage or the 301 to this. And it was a tactic that worked at the time, but that was before Google started telling you everything that's counted as a soft 404 anyway. So if it's a soft 404, it's a 404, just 410 it.
Right.
And I prefer 410 because it does seem to get out of Google faster because 404 seemed to stay so long.
Right. 410's gone is the protocol for that.
Goodbye. No.
So I do want to chat. There was another site that we're going to chat about in a little bit, D&D and Beyond, and then Core Web Vitals. But before we do that, I just had some curiosities as a practitioner myself. I was looking around Fandom. Maybe we'll do a little quick round of some questions I had about other SEO things with Fandom. If you can't answer or whatever, just say pass. But we'll make it a quick little fun round. And the first thing I was curious about was, how are you thinking about internal linking to articles? So I did a site search. It looked like there's like 18,000 or so articles indexed according to Google. It looks like there's very few links from the homepage to articles, right? So What does
Yes.
your internal linking strategy look like for that?
So the home site of www has not been essentially touched in several years, even before the domain migration. It's something that as we move forward in the next few years, I think that will be revamped. It was supporting a business model that was used a couple of years ago before Fandom had really moved, and they were trying to do a news and articles type feature and being like a media site. And it's something the company decided not to go forward with. So that's still there, but it's not really representative. And so you're right, it isn't the best look at who we are, which is the community side. So that's where you're going into Marvel or Star Wars or Elder Scrolls or something like that.
Interesting. So
you're right. That is not done and has a lot of work.
That's a good lesson for anybody, because I see sometimes people out there will say, oh, you do SEO for such and such. What about this problem? And I think it's a good lesson that everything is always in motion when you're working on SEO, especially the larger the site and the larger the company. You know, I could pick any site anybody is working on and find SEO issues with it. So that's a good lesson. What are your thoughts on subdomains versus subfolders? Because, you know, I always say if you want to start a fight with SEOs, stick them in a room and say subfolders or subdomains and let them kind of duke it out about, you know, what ranks better. I have my own feelings on it and thoughts and experience on it, but I'm curious, you know, what do you think about that whole debate?
I'm converted. I was not a subdomain person. I was a subfolder only.
Yeah.
And I understand why it's like that, but I think it's more nuanced and it really depends on the site and what you're trying to accomplish. For a site of our scale, it would not make sense to have everything be nested in folders. It would be very complex anyway. And I think by tearing apart the Star Wars from a video game like Pokemon, which has entertainment in common, but not really much cross yet. I think those are things that websites, when people are taking their opinion of it, it's best practices are best practices. Looking at what other SEOs are working on, definitely important. However, I think you have to really test and be more open-minded, which is something I hadn't been prior. And now I'm sold on it, of course, because it works for us. And it's not something that I would recommend in our company to totally change that. And just a caveat off of like looking at people's websites, often there's prioritization and there's a lot of work on our site. And so you have to look at what's going to make the biggest bang. And if we're not focused on homepage traffic, which is very minuscule compared to the overall rest of the site of 200,000 plus, that's where you have to put your time in and efficiency. If you're a smaller team, as we are, we're a team of 2, but I count the entire company as my team. So it's essentially, it's more challenging when you have that. And it doesn't mean that, because you're never going to get every single problem solved. And so that's the kind of, don't judge large sites. Sorry. And just, we're not horrible, I promise.
Because I kind of hinted at it too. My take on the subdomain versus subfolder thing, and you could echo your thoughts on this too. I always recommend, if whatever you have in the subdomain looks and feels like the main site, internal linking, design, all that stuff, then Google is more likely to look at it and treat it like part of the main site. I think this entire debate started because people would set up a blog on Blogspot or something on a subdomain, and Google had to come in and say, no, you're not going to pick up the 90 whatever domain authority from Blogspot. So I think it is a lot more nuanced than that, but I always see generally when the site looks and feels like the main site, there's generally not an issue with ranking.
And like a blog, I would have put on a subfolder for sure. It doesn't make sense for that to be a subdomain. However, it's more nuanced depending on the goals of your site and what it looks like. And it's really unique. It's hard.
So I'm curious if you do any log file analysis there. And if so, what tool you use, or if you have a process for that.
I do not. It is challenging to get log file analysis because they're like terabytes upon terabytes of our log files. So even deep crawl, as awesome as they are, it would be very not monetarily
not a practical
beneficial to even process all that. There are some internal tools I'd like to work on of picking out important trends. So it's more because of scale, it's just impossible. They're visiting us a lot. It's millions, and it could be across depending on the site. So I think what we can look at is if we're changing, titles or seeing if new sites are getting in the index and if if they're getting seen, and it's more of an internal linking process. Even with sitemaps, we have them. They need to be revisited. But this is, once again, one of those things that best practices, if you see a site that doesn't have a sitemap XML, it does not mean the SEO doesn't know what they're doing.
Right.
It's one discovery mechanism. It's not necessarily end all be all, because I can create a site with a sitemap XML, and if none of the internal links happen, Google won't find it, and they don't care. So it's not the sitemap that's the discovery mechanism. It's more in linking, which is something that we have a challenge of and we are working on, because it is important to get that discovery.
Yeah. On the last episode, 120 with Will Critchlow, we talked a little bit about A/B testing for SEO and split testing. And simultaneously, there was some debate in the SEO world about if that was even beneficial or worked. I'm curious if you've ever tried any A/B testing or split testing, and what's your take on that?
We do it by site because we can, which Will may not be able to do.
That's true. Yeah.
So I could pull this site that's similar to this site, maybe similar kind of competitive base, and then see how that performs with an A and a B experience, which is not a true A/B test in the same site, but you can watch patterns for sure. And we could take like a set of sites, like 20 and 20, and have like even bigger. And that is one of the values also of having 250,000 plus websites, is that you can play with stuff a little bit, because I can take my lower volume, and if I can get them up, then of course it's successful.
Yeah.
But that's something I want to do definitely more in the next few years. But as we're still migrating stuff and getting everything into the home site, that's in the to-do list, but further off.
Yep. The long to-do list we all have. So I want to talk a little bit about this other site, D&D and Beyond. Can you just explain what that site is? How does it relate to Fandom? And then we'll talk a little bit about SEO for that.
D&D Beyond is a part of our Fandom tabletop company, which is also, we have Cortex and now Tales of Zadia. It's a digital tool set that allows you to play D&D online with character sheets and dice rolling, and you can get all your books and the information in digital form. Especially during the pandemic, has been very helpful for folks who still want to play, but they can't be at the same table together writing on paper. Yeah. This is a way that helps you to manage all that, and it's I love it, and it's been amazing for me to have never played D&D really before working here, and that I played once, which I didn't really count because I had no idea what was going on. And it helps that learning curve, and you don't have to know what dice, you don't have to go buy dice. We have that. So it's a lot of benefits for people that are new to tabletop gaming.
And was this another situation where you acquired the site and then had to migrate it, and there was some issues with that?
Well, we didn't migrate it, but it was a part of a purchase. We purchased Curse Inc. I think it was 2018, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And that came with Gamepedia, which is another set of wikis, which is what we're migrating into the main site. Where D&D Beyond is on its own domain right now, and that's where it's living. It's a different part of the product, but it is still a way that as an entertainment, you get to live your fandom. And one of the things with Tales of Zadia is an example. You get to live Dragon Prince through a tabletop game. So you get to be a moon elf, and it's really cool. And you get to do the things that a moon elf would do. And it's essentially improv with dice. And that's all these tabletop games really are at the end of the day. It's a fun way to play with friends. Different people play differently. And so every experience is different, even if you're doing the same story. So I've DM'd with the same story 4 or 5 times, and every group did something very different. It was hilarious.
And as I'm listening to what the site is, it occurs to me there probably is some client-side JavaScript processing happening there. So how do you deal with that? Is it just sort of, do you think of anything that is accessible on the client side that's a function of the game that's okay if Google can't get to that? Or how do you sort of manage that?
Yeah. I think that's also a hygiene thing where you want to think about what you want to have Google have access to. Is, do they need to have character sheet access, or is that only for your users that are using the tool? You just have to figure out what hygiene means for each site. So some sites it's thin content. Some sites it might be a lot of content, but it's not relevant to a searcher finding, and you don't want a searcher to find that doorway into your site because it's not explaining where they are or what's going on.
Right.
You want to work with creating the funnels you want your searcher in that kind of a product, because this is a product where there's book sales, and we want you to buy the book, or we want you to subscribe and use the tools. We have free registration as well to sample some, but you get more features as you subscribe, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so as you work through the pathing you want, and that's marketing as a whole, not just the SEO, then you want to create those pathways for Google to do the discovery and the indexing and the ranking of what you want, not just every doorway, because sometimes you don't want people coming in every way because they're going to get there and that's not the experience you want them to have.
Right. Yeah. That's where SEO and UX really comes into play. How do you, do you have a rule in, like, some SEOs will say, yeah, it's okay to have some content behind client-side JavaScript. Google can get to it. Some SEOs will say, no, I would never want to do that, right? Do you have a general rule? Like, if you want content you absolutely want searchers to find in Google and you want Google to get to, will you ever put that behind JavaScript at all? Or do you always try to get that rendered for the in the HTML for the bot?
I like things to be rendered personally because I feel like you're being more truthful about who you are. And if you don't want something, you should be locking it behind a login.
Okay.
That's just my take in general. That doesn't mean we're doing it correctly everywhere. We still have a lot of work to do, even on D&D Beyond.
Yeah.
So it's a process. And I think for me, it should be rendered for the user as well as the crawler. And to me, because if you want the searcher to find that page, I think that's what I come from. And there might be nuance and I could probably be convinced differently. So there could be nuance to that situation as well, which I was very adamant about the subfolder subdomain argument, but this could be something different. Yeah. It's just for me, I think it's important to render everything, at least for both parties, because there's value in both.
And I want to chat a little bit about Core Web Vitals. I think you may have mentioned some particular challenges with fandom and the sites you work on with getting ready for Core Web Vitals. I think maybe around third-party scripts and things like that. So what are those particular challenges that you're facing trying to get ready for that?
We started getting ready as soon as there was a mention because this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, with such scale and not just having a third-party platform, which is MediaWiki that we're working from, but also having, we have certain extensions we're using. There's users can apply, images. They can add JavaScript that changes the pointer into a finger.
Oh, wow.
And that might be cute for them.
So
for their particular site.
A user can add JavaScript?
They can.
Oh, wow.
And so we have a process for approval.
Yeah.
However, a lot of that approval has happened over a long period of time where speed maybe wasn't as important, because there wasn't a mobile experience. And so we also have a completely different mobile experience. And that's something also to think about as you're building the site. So a lot of this is training users, some of which are very young and new to the web, who are just fans, but honestly, they've dabbled in JavaScript and HTML and they want to, wiki text, they're using that product. They want to play with stuff and that's cool. And so it's a good place to play and learn those skills as well. But it's also for our company, obviously can be stressful because they can do stuff. So that's where the partnership starts to be, where I'm not only considering my company stakeholders, I also work with a community team who also works with these, the admins and editors. I speak with them on Discord. We do like an AMA, at least once. We've been doing a couple of them. I spent 5 hours in one session once just to be an open resource because these are across the world. So you want to be available for different time zones.
Yeah.
And so just being available to answer their questions about why do we have to do it this way? Well, why would Google do this? And then helping them understand, even if I don't agree with Google every time, this is what they're thinking. And so I might even agree with the user. Like they might ask a question. I'm like, I am totally on board with what you're saying. However, this is how Google is looking at it.
Yeah.
A good example of Core Web Vitals problems is the SPAs, the single page apps. They're going to punish them.
Yep.
But they're fast.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, unless they change their mind from now until the launch.
Yeah.
But as of right now, the scores on SPAs tend to be very poor. And so even though as a user in your mobile device, it is a faster experience for someone trying to buy something, quick and getting out. So I think they'll also be having to adjust it at some point. But yeah, as we're getting ready, those are challenges we have to look at and make sure we're passing those scores.
I'm curious to the practicalities of when you have user-generated JavaScript. Are you familiar with where does that end up? Do those end up in distinct files that's like, okay, here's all our user generated JavaScript versus our own, how does that logistically play out?
Yes and no.
Wow.
We have a wiki that talks about common JavaScript products to use that have been vetted and work. And so like if Star Wars community uses something and they're like, here, you guys can use this in your community as well. However, it's not managed that way at this point. It's something that with Core Web Vitals, we're starting to work with them more closely to see what's out there, how to help the users because, and also how to keep them modern because, for example, imagine if a site was using Flash, which they weren't, thank goodness, and then Flash goes away, but they just were doing it on their own and they're not checking the site every day. Maybe they are. And then one day this, stuff is broken. And so that's a poor user experience, even outside of a Core Web Vitals. So that would be an example of where we have to be cognizant. And as we're crawling the site, we're finding these things as well. The community team is working very closely with these admins, editors, and participants in the community who are creating this stuff and helping educate them and helping them work on their skills of, okay, well, this may not be the best way to do it. Let's try this and that kind of thing.
How are you managing improving for Core Web Vitals? Are things at least at like a template level where you can kind of say, okay, these like 5,000 pages are in a template, or like how does that play out for you?
So anything that is MediaWiki, yes, which is helpful. So that's where the tech and the product org are working on those different things. And then some of it's ads. So we have an ad engineering team who's working on how do we get the ads to no longer create CLS on our pages. So there's a lot of testing going on right now. We've put some launches out to see, is this helping? Is this any better? What's going on? And so that's how, once again, the A/B testing comes into play with that, where we'll have these sites we're going to launch it on and watch what happens with CLS there. And then here's the rest of the site. And here's what happens there. What happened? Is it good, bad, neutral? So hopefully good.
I'm curious.
But I think for me, what was so stressful is that it's not that you just need to get one of your metrics in the green. They all have to pass.
Right. So
it's almost as if you don't get rewarded unless you get 100 on your test. So that's a little bit frustrating in that respect, but it is something we're working very as much as we can towards that goal.
Yeah. And do you think that this is going to have this big ranking impact as much as maybe Google would want us to think, right? Because they've said it's going to be a little ranking signal. My take on it is I don't think it's going to be as big of an impact as they want us to believe. But what's your take on that?
I think it depends on the industry. And it depends on your competitors and what they're working on. So if your industry is slow moving at changes, there's a lot of corporate stuff, a year might not be enough to get all the stuff done. And that's fair. So in that industry, they may not see that impact. However, if you're in a environment where there's a lot of startup companies competing in your SERPs, if there's a lot of faster, more modern sites, potentially this could be the difference when, for our company, looking at the difference between an actor page on IMDb and our page, they're very similar content. They're different. One's written by a person, one is more manufactured through database. So in that experience, potentially if I don't know what IMDb is working on, but if they're working on it and they surpass us, why wouldn't Google give them a higher rank when it's faster? So of course they would. And the difference between rank 1 and rank 2 on your mobile is a lot. Yeah. With all the stuff. So this is yes and no. I think it depends. I think there is nuance. But it's kind of your competitive set and knowing. And it's like one of those, the SSL didn't hurt much either. Right. However, it moved the needle for people. And Google realized they couldn't be too harsh either way because it was taking people longer to get into SSL. Right. For a variety of reasons, because roadmaps are long, et cetera.
I think if you take that one example of like, you've got an IMDb page and one of your pages about a movie, right? This is where I wonder if, okay, let's say you want to rank above IMDb. My feeling or sense is that content improvements first would really help. Sure. Maybe internal linking, maybe like all the traditional SEO things we think about, like being topically complete, being relevant to the intent, having the functionality, right? So like out of sort of all those things considered, that's why I'm wondering if Core Web Vitals is really that needle mover, like if we really have the best content. compared to all other things.
I think that could be true, but I also would argue it's user experience. So if the users aren't satisfied at your site because content's shifting around, and I know our site does that on your mobile phone. So please don't leave comments here. We know we're working on it, but that experience is annoying. The experience where you're reading something and all of a sudden there's an ad that, where was I? I was somewhere and I know I have to go scroll. Or I get to a site and it won't let me move around when I was trying to see where I am. It's taking too long. I think those are enough of a signal that, is this like mobile get-in concept? Maybe not, but I think it could be big impact depending on the user. So will Walmart get penalized? Probably not, because if you're looking specifically for Walmart something, but if you're in an industry like entertainment where there's a lot of different players that are trying to get that, and it's a user who, the searcher just wants the information. So from that perspective, that user experience is higher in some ways than just buying. Right. Because if you're trying to buy, you're probably a little more patient if you're in the right brand, et cetera. Yeah. However, if you're an e-com site that's competing with Walmart or Amazon and your experience is not top notch, maybe you will get dinged because, the brand wins. In that case.
That's a good point. Are you doing anything special to prepare for measuring for any impact, or are you just going to rely on like the rank trackers or Search Console that you already have set up?
Yeah, we're probably going to use those for the most part. We also are doing our own tools in-house using the API that Google provided. And we have a process that we built in-house that because people are forgetting, it's not just the drop dead date, it's anything you do after that could also affect you. So you might be ready for the A paper on the day of, and then 2 weeks later or a month later, you pushed out 3 releases that have degraded you into a different range and you could fail again. Yeah. And so we've put in a lot of tools to alert to what does this release do to our core web vitals, and is that acceptable as a threshold, et cetera, so that you don't end up in this tiny death by 1,000 cuts process of releases degrading your performance over time. And then before you know it, you're like back in the red several months later, and you're like, oh, here we have to go this again.
Yeah. I did want to, if you have a few minutes, I want to ask a couple quick questions about dictionary, because I know you did some migration work there. When we chatted before this interview, you mentioned about dealing with doorway pages, right? I thought that was really fascinating. So what was the problem with the doorway pages there?
Dictionary.com defined, pun intended, doorway pages. So you'd have one definition for run, and then you would have a page called running, runs, have run, have ran, all the different combinations of possibly with that term, but the same definition because it doesn't really change. Right. And there was a period of time where that made sense because from a language perspective, Google didn't understand maybe the concept of run and running are basically the same thing, just different tenses. So getting ready for that change was a big deal. And so when we get these warnings from Google, I'm less scared as I used to be because like SSL was less impactful, or mobile get-in wasn't as mobile get-in-y, if you will. It wasn't as scary as it could have been. Yeah. But at the same time, I think you should always be balancing that risk. And if your company is depending on traffic, and in case for dictionary, it's depending on traffic to sell the ads, that's a big enough initiative that you should probably repair it. And so we did. And that was a major project. It took, I don't remember how long, but it was just, pretty intense between the launch and the announcement and the launch of getting this ready. Yeah. Since I think they didn't give us a date when it was launching. They were just saying sometime in spring or something like that. And yeah, you kind of look at what is the cadence of their normal release schedule. Well, most core algorithms, they usually have one a quarter. So you have to go, okay, when is their quarterly launch? Yeah. And for new SEOs, that is important. Look at their launch schedule, and that is a good metric to get an understanding of when big things are going to start happening. So getting in all of your fixes before that's probably good so that you can get the reward of that core. And looking at whose launch schedule, the companies or Google's? Google. So right. I'm not saying it because no, I don't work there, but we can look at their history and generally May, May to June, generally September to October. And also the second week of February too. I mean, we just had an unannounced update, and I believe like Phantom update years ago was February 7th or 8th, like same exact date. It's that time of year, so it's like, there's a cadence that every company kind of falls into with their major So you can start to look at that and then see how did different ones affect the company you work at, and then go, okay, it helps you kind of guide, I guess, the fear factor within and the risk and what you're willing to take. So yeah, core web vitals it'll be very interesting. I know you're saying it might not be impactful. I think it might, depending. Yeah. I just literally think it will be to certain industries, because unless no one does anything, which then of course it won't affect anything, because yes, content has to rank.
Yeah, very interesting. Also, one thing that you hinted at earlier, but I want to make sure the listeners take away, is you had mentioned putting pages behind a login, but actually that, I believe, a dictionary for you as well fulfills a bigger purpose. Like, I think you think of it as an option for no indexing or preventing of crawling, right? Of essentially blocking Google from certain content. So talk through that thought process a little bit, because I found that pretty fascinating.
We didn't do that at dictionary, but I could see that as an opportunity. And it also helps you engage your users in a better way. And it gives them a reason to give you a login when every site's asking for that. Yeah. And everyone wants better engagement on their sites. We know that. So that's been a challenge my entire career at every company I've worked at, is that we want users to not be one and done, whether it be from social media or search. It's that we're constantly providing them what they want, but not getting them to stick around.
Yeah. And I think
there are some areas, there are some areas of a site where it's not valuable to the people who are anonymously coming in. I kind of talked about that with D&D Beyond, where there are certain experiences that are better for a person when they're logged in, because they're more engaged in your product. You can explain more, you can help guide them in that part of it, instead of them coming to something and being like, I don't really know what this is and I'm going to leave. Yeah.
And so you're actually thinking of this as an option for like an alternative option to no indexing or robots.txt.
Well, with the potential news of last week that Core Web Vitals may affect no index pages, it's a little scary, because those pages are not ones I want to. How do you get buy-in at your company after you've been working on Core Web Vitals on everything that's indexed for this period of time, and then 2 months, 3 months-ish before the potential launching, we know it's coming. Yep. Now they're saying, oh, by the way, the no index stuff too. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, but we don't want you to see that stuff. We're not trying to get your users for that stuff. That's why we say no index.
Yeah.
So then the challenge becomes, maybe that's what you have to do as a solution in order to keep Google from trying to grade those pages in any way. But this is one of those things where I disagree with Google. I don't think they should be grading that content. I understand what they're saying, that they care about the user experience after the first click or whatever. However, that's not really their business, in my opinion. Once you've come to my site, it should be my business. And so that would be up to me to figure out. And I understand the gamification they're worried about, where spammers game this system or whatever. But I still think it's one of those not fair, because there's companies that have legitimate reasons for no indexing a lot of content. Yeah. And it's hard to convince people necessarily to log in for that when that's not the open web too. So there's like a balance of that. What's open, it's a challenge.
One last question on that, the blocking stuff behind a login. Are you also blocking that from being crawled as well? Are you doing some crawl optimization along with that?
Yeah, so you would have to have a login. So it'd be 403 forbidden if someone tried to reach that content, and then it would force a login. So that's how you would block it behind login.
Are you blocking it from Googlebot with robots.txt or no follows or anything like that?
I have, but my robots.txt doesn't tend to get always, what should I say, obeyed, if you will. So
really, by Googlebot?
I've had many sites that this has happened where they don't care that it was there, and they
crawl it anyways.
I have a theory. This is just my SEO theory, that there are some sites in brands that they don't actually crawl right away, that they see a link for discovery and they throw it in the index. Then when they go back to crawl and they see it's not supposed to be crawled, that's where you get your message that says the robots is not allowing me to do this. Blah, blah. Because this has happened consistently at companies I've worked over my career. And so I know that maybe it's not what they're trying to do, or maybe they are. I know they've said that they don't do that. However, I've just had evidence of that. And so I can't 100% say that's exactly what happened. However, that's my hypothesis. So that's my SEO hypothesis.
I do know Googlebot does some funny things. I'll see Googlebot crawling URLs that don't exist that it's predicting to exist. I had a situation with a client years ago. They migrated, speaking of which, and they didn't move all of their URLs, but Googlebot tried to crawl what those new URLs would have been had they moved them and kept them identical. So I found that really fascinating too. And I did ask John Mueller about that, I think, when he was on this podcast years ago. And I think he kind of dodged around that question.
I'm not saying they mean to. It could be a bug for all I know.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not going to judge that. And that's what I've explained also to folks when I'm teaching them about Google is Google's not perfect. They are engineers. Just like we have bugs, they have bugs. And so sometimes things might appear differently than they should. So they're not necessarily like Google's trying to misdirect. It's that it's a bug and they don't want to talk about all their bugs, which no one does.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I think that was something in my maturity as an SEO. It took a while to understand they aren't gods. They are a company and they have engineers who are not perfect. And so things happen.
Yeah. And we can also
last year, wasn't it, with all the indexing problems last year?
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
It happens.
That does. And we can also disagree with things they do on purpose, like that new Google Sans font they're testing in SERPs, which to me is like you're just trying to brand everything as if it's from Google, and I'm not a big fan of that. But at any rate, Becky, it was great chatting with you. I wanted to just ask before we wrap things up, is there anywhere at all you would like to direct people, whether it's somewhere they can find yourself online or where they can, maybe there's stuff on Fandom or otherwise that you would love for people to check out?
Sure, you can check out your fandom, maybe not use Google every time and just visit it. We would love that. Also, you can find me on my LinkedIn at Becky Westmoreland, or you can follow me at JadedTLC on Twitter. But I might be talking about gaming as well as SEO stuff there. So pardon the the mixed audience.
Great. And
thank you very much for inviting me on. This has been great.
Absolutely. And that was JadedTLC, correct, on Twitter?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, Becky, thank you so much for joining us on episode 121 of Experts in the Wire, and we'll talk to everyone next time.